So I wonder, with your films, the stories you've often told, they can often be very challenging, but they're built on this kind of foundation of myths, of biblical tales, of very, like with Black Swan, a well-known story which is then contemporized. So do you think about this issue of kind of unifying people's experiences and then creating divergence when you're putting together the stories and when you're editing the films?
We mostly try to ground the films in a very sort of simple understructure. I believe in having a very, very strong kind of engine, sort of a very basic story that is there, even though we often sort of disguise it with lots of ideas. And but I think to hold it all together, it really needs this real skeletal structure at the core of it. And then we work really, really hard to build that out with kind of very traditional and old school ways of looking at story structure. We come, both of us, kind of, are big students of myth and looking at the kind of signposts that people of stories that people have been telling for thousands of years. It could be much longer than that we've been telling stories like that. And we've often discussed about, there's some type of, there's something going on in that story structure that we think that is, somehow, just part of what we are as humans. If we get it when we're very young or if we're born with it, it's definitely this part of the experience, the human experience that it is definitely pan-cultural. And the connections between that for all people on the planet is, something we try to plug into.
That's something actually that saying that, it poses the question in my mind for Jeff. So your research is actually looking at this systematic kind of expectation of narrative almost. So do you think there are brain networks that are there in place to kind of prime us for this kind of narrative structure?
So there's a meme floating around that we think in stories, and I find that attractive and dangerous. I'm really curious to hear what you guys think about it. I'm also struck that if you're going to have a big driving engine that runs a whole movie, and this connects for those who were here yesterday to some of the data that Yuri described, that things that happened 20, 30 minutes ago in the movie affect your processing of this moment now. And so I wonder, do you think about, okay, well, what happened in their brains, 30 minutes ago, that's going to change how this shot has to go?
We don't use the word brains. We usually talk about emotion. But yeah, we're always thinking about where the audience is and what they've experienced and what they're thinking. There's usually always there's always a theory of where the camera is and why it's there. Sometimes it's on a scene-by-scene basis when you're making those decisions, but if you've really done your work, hopefully you're thinking about it globally. We definitely had a theory in Requiem for a Dream when we were doing that to start off wider and move tighter and tighter as a sort of to bring people deeper and deeper into the subjectivity of the characters. And it was definitely something we were playing with a lot, was subjectivity and objectivity in all my films. Probably the least amount in Noah, which is sort of more of just sort of a great old story we were telling objectively. But yeah, we're always thinking about how we get into an emotional state moment by moment and how to bring as many people in the audience with us.
So, and what about this idea that you can make people do whatever you want if you just package it up in a story?
You mean characters or audience members?
Audience members.
To do whatever you want? What do you mean, like Nuremberg
type
of stuff?
So there's this idea, and I think it's very powerful. Peter Guber has a book called Tell to Win that lays out this idea. And you see it in, so he's a film industry person, you also see it from scientists that we think in narrative, and therefore if you want to persuade people or control them or reach them. You got to make it a story. And I, like I said, I find that really attractive, but also dangerous.
Well, I think there's a truth to that. Absolutely, these stories change the world. Like I kind of noticed when JFK sort of became the cultural sort of conversation for a long time. That was the big shift in conspiracy theory kind of becoming mainstream. And you see that throughout, I think, where films sort of change the way people think. I don't know if it's if that's the only way to make an impact, but I do think that it's a very powerful tool, because I think you're playing out, you're definitely riding along the subjective experience, and your research sort of shows that of these characters. You're feeling what's going on in the characters, and you're playing it out. And I used to always talk about Requiem as, when there was all the critique early on that film about what good is it, and I was talking about how tragedies are really not made in American cinema. At that time, there was really no tragedies, and how it's sort of this dead art form that was like a big part of literature and theater for a long time before that, but it kind of died with the Hollywood happy ending, and that there's a value to it in that, through the catharsis of those characters, you actually can apply that stuff to your life. And that stuff has come back to me from different people who that film, has influenced or changed their lives and stuff. So I think that definitely, I think story. I mean, that's the basis, I think, of story, or at least my imagination of the cavemen telling stories back in the day. They were sort of, they were giving basically warning messages. I think that's kind of what Noah was about, and why it's been told for so many thousands of years. And all of these stories that, in the patterns we see between all the mythology, they're all giving lessons that people are experiencing, so that when it happens in real life, we'll be somewhat prepared to deal with it.